Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to our Filoli members. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Susan O'Sullivan, and I'll be the moderator for our event this evening. So Julie and I have our gin martinis. Cheers. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
And take it away, Julie. Of course, after you have your sip. We always worry on these cocktails for the curator that Julie doesn't get a chance to actually drink her drink because she's talking the whole time.
I usually wander the house after for about 20 minutes, enjoying it and checking on everything. Well, welcome everyone. This is an exciting new era for this room. I'm actually enjoying one of the new features of this room, which are some low slung leather club chairs that are over on the north wall. And this one happens to be our CEO's favorite spot. This is Kara's favorite chair. Whenever she comes in to talk to me when I'm working downstairs, this tends to be the spot that I find her. So it's a comfy new chair, and it's a spot where people can sit and be more immersive in the house. You know, along with our exhibit this summer, not only have we been focused on making more immersive environments, but we also wanted to give some opportunities that sort of fit in with the space. So we actually got some beautiful, new modern leather chairs that are the same profile and look as the chairs that were originally in the room here during the Bourn era. But this room is going to look kind of completely different, and it's going to continue to evolve and change in the near future. So right now, if you've come in the past, you've seen Filoli. This has been sort of interpreted as a trophy room, and it's never quite been what you would have expected to see historically. I mean, I've been here, it'll be 9 years in November, and I know I've shown botanical art in this room. We've shown trophies in this room. We've talked a lot about why worry over the years and the sort of Roth era horsemanship on property. We've often had the Viceroy carriage in the middle of the room, and so it's never really felt like one of the historic rooms. It's been sort of a glorified hallway in a lot of ways. Especially, the botanical art, it's beautiful, but again, it's modern pieces. And so it was totally different from the families. And so this has actually been a fun project to sort of reimagine the room. So our first step is right now, we've reset it with existing furniture, things that we already had in the collection. So I've looked at historic photos. I've looked at the 1936 Bourn inventory, which is an amazing treasure trove. It's about a 5-inch typed binder of single page sheets, and it lists down to the ashtray level the contents of the house at the time of the Bourn's passing in 1936. So Agnes and William both died about 6 months apart, and a trust took over. It was 3 banks ran their trust here, and they went through and they cataloged the whole house. So we have a value on one side, and it usually says where, if it was known where it was purchased, if it's a piece of art or furniture usually, and then it has sort of a purchase value and a replacement value at the time. So it's a very accounting style document, but it tells you the inventory for each space. And here in this gentleman's lounge, it listed the furniture that was in here. Oddly, it does not include the artwork that was in this room. The inventory is usually very accurate down to like the every single picture, and it'll usually tell you the title, artist, and year, and whether or not it was a mezzotint or an oil painting or a panel painting or watercolor. It's usually pretty specific, and so it's one of my favorite sources for historic information on furnishing the house. And in this room, as I said, there's only 2 known photographs that exist of this room, one from the Bourn era and one from the Roth era. And it changed a little bit. The Roths added the first trophy case to the wall right next to me. And Mrs. Roth then added a second case, and she started filling it with silver. But they hadn't changed the shell of the room, and much of the furniture, it looks like, kind of carries over a little bit. And so it was a gentleman's lounge. It's meant to be a men's retreat. Much like the drawing room that we've just been working in is the ladies' room. This is still a time, if you've watched Downton Abbey, our house functioned exactly like Downton Abbey. I've had both families confirm that for me. And I've watched through the series, I think 4 times now. And you don't want to watch it with me though, unless you like seeing like what's on the table behind them. How do they have that displayed? Like, can they move? How far is the table from the chair? Like, that's how I watch Downton Abbey. Also the costuming, I'm in love with the costuming. But it's usually, you know, it was set as a room where the men could go play cards, smoke cigars, drink some brandy, have a little sherry, and high stakes poker games were a thing. Remember, William Bourn is known for his family's Bourn luck. And that's a story that we're telling in here, is the Empire Mine and their connection to the gold market and the gold industry here in California. You know, the Empire Mine was one of more than a dozen mines that they owned both here and in Nevada. They owned both gold and silver. But the Empire Mine is one of the most profitable gold mines of the entire California gold rush. It's also one of the largest and deepest mines in the state. And it was still profitable when it was closed. I mean, there's still gold down there. It just became increasingly difficult to get at it. If you've been to Grass Valley and you've been to any of the mines, if you go to Empire Mine, you can actually go right down to the entrance of the mine, and there's a big gate that's across it. And you can see that the water is just feet beyond the gate. And so there are 367 miles of flooded mine shaft that go almost a mile deep. It's 11,000 feet. And so it's crazy. And they have this amazing room, it's called the secret room. And it's how they used to track where people were and where they were working. And it's a scaled model of the entire mine shaft system. And it lights up. So you can tell like what sector people are in, and it's a dark room, and little spotlights will beam onto the little shafts. And it's really geeky cool, but I had a ridiculous amount of fun pushing all the buttons and seeing where it lit up and how it crosses over the neighboring mines' top land, and how you can own, you know, the subterranean rights to minerals and how that works and that whole system. So it was really fascinating. And so William took over the mine at age 22. His father had just passed away, you know, 2 years before, in 1970, he was born in 57. His dad passes away when he's a teenager. He then goes away to school at Cambridge. At 22, in his junior year, his mom says, "You have to come home to California. It looks like the mine is bottomed out. We've pulled all the gold that there is to pull, and it looks like you need to come." She was being fought by a lot of different business associates of her husband, and they were all sort of telling her the same thing, and she didn't necessarily trust their gut, but she trusted her 22-year-old son's gut, right? So she brings him back. He never graduated from Cambridge. He came back and he went to Grass Valley, and he said, "I think we need to go deeper." And he brought over from Cornwall, England, because he'd just been in England and he knew this tradition of hard rock mining. He brought over Cornish miners, and they dug deeper than anyone had ever thought of digging in California. So the mine was almost bottomed out at 1,200 feet. And over the coming decades, he would take it to 11,000 feet. And I mean, here you start out, these miners are being lowered into like water cavities to like mine in buckets. And then later, these massive pumping operations to dry the mine out allowed them to go into all these places. But that meant that ultimately, by going that deep, and it's a part of the Ophir gold vein that runs through there, and they hit vein after vein after vein of gold. And so he adopted the same kind of, it's a nickname of sorts. It's really, you know, something that was attached to both him and his father in business in San Francisco, was that they have the Bourn luck, and that everything they touch turned to gold. So if you keep hitting vein after vein after vein, it means that ultimately Empire Mine extracts 5.8 million ounces of gold. That's almost $2 billion in today's money. So we know that, you know, by the time William is building Filoli, he's pulling out, you know, millions of dollars a year out of the mine. Him and his family own shares in the mine. His sisters own shares. His mother owned shares. There was actually lawsuits about the shares and the divvying of money, especially because when they sold their interest in 1929 to the mine, they rolled that stock into Filoli Corporation, which was a California corporation. That was how they ran the house. Agnes, to note, is important to note, she's president of that corporation. So I've always appreciated that. So, you know, they were really, his kind of gambling and him trusting his gut is something that he did on numerous occasions. In the late 1890s, he was at O'Farrell Street at a restaurant in San Francisco, and he was playing a game of Parapinto. It's a dice throwing game. It's not terribly well known these days, but he was playing against, and I like that the newspaper says it's a South American planter. It's another business fellow, and both of them were quite intoxicated from all accounts, according to the newspaper. And he bet him $32,000 in 1890 on a single throw of the dice. And the gentleman lost, and he looked right at Bourn and he said, double or nothing. And he took him, he said, sure, go again. And he walked away with $78,000 on that game. That's $2.2 million today. In today's money. So we know that William was willing to throw down on dice and that he was willing to lose it. You know, we talked a little bit, you know, a couple of weeks ago when we were in the dining room about Greystone and the fact that he probably lost $1 million personally on the construction of Greystone because of Phylloxera and the market and everything hitting. So he gambled and very, very occasionally lost, but the vast majority of the time he won. And my favorite gambling story is actually in April, on the day of the San Francisco earthquake. William and Agnes are not in San Francisco. Every time William finished a business deal, he took a grand tour. 3-4 months. Go travel the world. Go to Cairo, London, all across Europe, visit Asia, like all across the world was how he recouped his inner balance at the end of a big business deal. It's how he let off steam. 8 times he took a grand tour. Most wealthy people were lucky to take one. And maybe they had favorite haunts that they went back to, but he took 8 of these. And on the night of the San Francisco earthquake, he broke the bank of Monte Carlo's casino. That means that you bet so much that the house is unable to pay the debt on the spot. So you can imagine the games that must have happened in this room in the very early years before the strokes started to hit him. And so we wanted to bring back some of that gentleman's lounge feel, make this not a glorified hallway, bring back some of that late Bourn. And you could see the room being transitioning into that early Roth period since so much of the furniture traded over. And what's going to transform in here is the art on the walls, the objects in the room, bringing back beautiful antiques that have a masculine feel to them. And since, as I mentioned, for some reason, the inventory for this room does not include artwork, even though you can see artwork in the pictures of the room. They're not quite clear enough to make out. Like I can see that there's a pastoral scene and I can see that there's a man on horseback, but not enough to see any greater detail than that. Is that I've pulled the inventory from his personal bedrooms, and he had 2 bedrooms upstairs, as well as from the study across the hall. You know, we often show that room as the Roth era because it was their family room and it was their favorite room on the first floor. And so it's a really great way of introducing the family, showing their family portraits and telling their story. And so we don't think that right now you're going to instantly see that room in a Bourn era. But what he chose for these most personal spaces in the house will sort of give us a snapshot of his artistic sensibility, like we have for Agnes in the drawing room. You can't look at the 40 mezzotints in the drawing room and not feel Agnes as a collector. You know, it's women and children and beautiful scenes, and life is beautiful and something to be treasured. And so that's what she chose to collect for her most personal feminine space to share with girlfriends and with family. And so I wanted to see, well, what did William surround himself with? And so we're recollecting art that was in his study, that was in his personal bedroom. And there's going to be really fun new stories that come out of that. One of them is, I'm trying to research whether or not William may have been a Rosicrucian or a member of a fraternal order. Specifically, not the ancient mystical order of the Rose Cross that exists here in California, but one, the Anglophile, the English version. And that's because there is no other reason for him to have the Grand Master's portrait in full regalia in his bedroom if he's not a member. And the master that he has in his room is not only the headmaster of the Rosicrucians English tradition, but also like the co-founder of the Golden Dawn fraternal order that started in England. And it's right about the exact same time. They're of the same generation. This could be something that he did when he was in Cambridge. You join the fraternal secret society. You're, a society class. It was something very common to do. And it was fascinating to me because when I saw it on the list, you may have just seen it was a portrait of someone, but as soon as I saw that it was master and I started looking up the person, I used to work for the Rosicrucians when I managed the Egyptian Museum in San Jose. And so I learned a lot about the order when I worked there. And so I was like, oh, this is fascinating. Like I've never in 9 years of doing research on William found that connection to him before. And so I thought that was something really new and interesting that could be a cool story of what he was willing to do and how kind of explorative and what he was up to in Cambridge. And so I think there's fun things in there. There's also some new mezzotints and some colored engravings. One of them is of Grass Valley about the 1850s. You can see why he would want that one in the study. He also had a view of San Francisco that was in the 1850s, he was born in San Francisco in 1857. So that's the city that he remembered, was this rough and tumble Wild West that his mother absolutely abhorred. She was never comfortable in San Francisco, and that's why she ended up in St. Helena, was she just thought it was not New York City. It was wild. There was saloons and, prostitution. There was a lot going on. It was a lot of mining operations in those early years. It was just rough and tumble. And so you can also see the city grow and develop along with William, since he grew along with it, and actually just received an 1850s mezzotint. It's an 1854 mezzotint view of San Francisco by Henry Bill. It's a chromolithograph. And that's a new piece that just arrived yesterday. And it's gonna still go out for matting and framing, but you're gonna see it in the matte, well, the lack of matte. I guess it does have a little tiny mat on it, but not one that we would approve of. And then it'll get a nice new frame as well that has that sort of masculine feel for this space. We also have a Hunsinger poker table that's coming. That'll be playable, where you as a guest would be able to come into the room and sit down and play a hand of poker down the road. Right now with the COVID situation, we're still trying to figure out sanitization. So you may not be able to sit right away, but the plan is for you to be able to sit. It has been the last year, so we'll get there again. And then we also have a really exciting new addition that we actually just secured this weekend. It was won at auction thanks to the generosity of an amazing donor. And it is a National Billiard table circa 1890. It's a beautiful oak table that's going to be in the middle of the room. So a beautiful pool table that just will look like it belongs in the space, along with a wall-mounted cue rack. And so we're really looking to show that room where you've got a poker table in the corner, you've got low slung leather club chairs, crystal ashtrays are out. There's not a historic picture of the house that doesn't have like 8 or 9 ashtrays in a view. Everybody smoked at that point. And the ceilings show us, when we dig through the layers of paint, that there was a lot of heavy tobacco use in the house. And so, we just want to bring back that vibe and the feel in this room, and the table will do that more than anything. And we're still hunting for the proper rug, but you'll be able to see here in a second the bow tie insets in the floor. One of our COVID projects that we did during the shelter in place order was, every time we refinish a floor in the house, especially on the first floor here, when they stripped the floors in the 80s, after the filming of The Game, was here, it was really fashionable to have light oak floors. And historic preservation has changed their opinion about what you change and what you don't in the intervening 40 years. And so they stripped all the floors of their dark golden oak stain, which was a really caramely brown, and they left them basically nude with a clear coat, which has always looked bizarre to me because these are big, beautiful rooms and you have this really light floor where you want them to have some like weight. There should be some like visual weight, and a dark floor does that. And also the paint colors that they chose historically for the room look best against a darker brown. They just do. So we've been working on that room by room. We did the drawing room last year. And during the shelter in place order, we had our floor guys come in and redo this floor. And what was lovely about that is most visitors do not appreciate the smell of a shellacked floor. And so no one had to smell it, and we didn't have to put signs up and sort of route people around. And I was getting pictures from our facilities team who were amazing. I came in and emptied the room by myself, mask on and everything. And then I got pictures over the next week of like, here's it sanded, here's the stain going down, here's the final buff coat. And so it was something exciting for me when I was at home, getting to watch step by step. And then now with a dark floor, all of these beautiful floors throughout the house were installed by 5 Swedish brothers of the Inlaid Floor Company of San Francisco. And they were amazing. And they did this beautiful detail work. And all the inlay in this room is it sort of has a basket weave pattern around the outside. And that's about where your rug would be. And then in the middle of the field of the room are these beautiful cross-cut bow ties that are dropped into the space. And when it was nude, if you knew to look down there, you could kind of see them. But what really pops out now is because of the cross grain and the way that it picks up the dark stain, they really pop and they look like tiger striped bow ties. Like they're really fantastic looking. So the floor looks stunning. You'll be able to see the bow ties around the edges of the room, even when we get a rug in. We've got some sittable chairs for the poker table. And at the moment, since it's behind a stanchion, Mr. Bourne's poker table is actually out. It folds and accordions in half when you didn't need it, so it could tuck up against the wall. And so we actually have 2 antique poker tables in the room from the collection, one of which is Mr. Bourne's. Then we have a kind of plays tribute to the Grand Tours and to William as an Anglophile and a lover of all things English.
So Julie, I know you're going to take us on a walkabout, but before you do, I have a question from our friend Kathy Gust. She's asking about that lion sculpture that you have next to you. Could you talk to us about that? And it is very masculine, I have to say.
It is. We've pulled out a few pieces. One of the pieces in here, a bronze figure of a soldier on horseback, is actually a Bourn era bronze that's in the collection still that Mrs. Roth gave to us. We have some early founding father statues in here. I have a model of the earth that's based on the Egyptian model of the earth as the center of the universe and the whole system must be moving around us, which was very fashionable. And then this guy is a carved ivory piece. And we actually have a few historic carved ivory. These are all already a few hundred years old. And ivory is a difficult material. It's been a commodity and it's been used as long as humans have been making art. And so for us, it gives us a chance to talk about these collectible pieces that you would have picked up on the Grand Tour, and to also remind people that we clearly don't want to be collecting ivory today. When we accept a piece of ivory, we have to prove its age, we have to prove that it wasn't a recent import. We have to do CITES records and everything for ivory when it comes through museum collections. And even we can't sell them on the open market. They have to transfer to another organization. It's heavily restricted, but we actually have a few pieces of stunning, beautiful artistic carving. And so this carved lion is on a carved piece of wood below him, but he's this striding lion. And he reminds me so much of the bronze lion statues that the Bourns had in the house. And this one is an African lion, but most of the lions that the Bourns collected that were in bronze were California lions. They were mountain lions, pumas. So, and we still have 4 pumas that live on property today. So we get beautiful video of them as they make their way and raise their families. And so there was a striding lion that was about twice the size of this guy. He was pretty beefy, and he was like a striding and walking that was on the reception room table, sort of where Sun and Moon usually are in there during the Bourn period. And then there was an Arthur Putnam, Native American, and it's a running gazelle, or some sort of deer that's like in the process of being shot. That's a beautiful bronze that was on that same table.
So, but Julie, I do have another question before you walk around. Susan Martin, who's a member, is asking us, were there animal head trophies on the walls that you can tell from the information that we have?
There were, but not in this room. There was 2 stags that were across the hall, and we still have one of them up on the wall. The second one actually is still retained by the Bourn family. And they were both shot at Muckross. And they actually have a plaque on them that says what day the hunt was. And Billy Vincent, the Bourne's grandson, came to Filoli during the Roth era for a visit. He was in the area, he came to visit them, and he said he remembered being on that hunt, and Mrs. Roth took it off the wall and gave it to him that day. So the second one is actually still with the Bourn family, but we know that they had at least 2 of them in the house. Muckross, if you've ever been, and I was grateful to get to take a whole group along with our CEO Kara in 2017. We went and we spent time in Ireland with a group of members. I think there was about 24 of us, and Muckross is full of hunting trophies, like all the walls of the main hall. So I've always sort of appreciated that we only have the one. But we do have the Sally Mcbride Nature Center collection, which has about 100 mounted specimens that are, the residents that live on property to be able to share with guests what kind of animals and what kind of environments are on site. But most of the Bourn era ones were bronze.
I like that better.
Yes.
So Julie, let's try and see what happens if you walk around, because I know everyone's anxious to see all the beautiful things you've reset in here.
All right, I might lose the video for a sec because sometimes my fingers kind of bub that. All right, here we go. We're mobile. So yeah, this is our little fellow. So he's beautifully detailed, and you can see we sort of have a lamp and some collectibles. We also have this is an original Bourn era cachepot and stand that originally was in the ballroom actually. And right now we've done an exhibit that's talking all about the Empire Mine. And so you have pictures of the mining operations. We give a little history on the mine, when they took control of it, what happened, how much gold they pulled out of it. There's actually a really fun picture that's one of my favorites of William actually, right? Let's see if I can get in front of the light. That is William and his daughter Maud when he's dressed in his helmet and has one of the dogs with him, just sitting on the porch with his daughter. And it's one of my favorite pictures of William. And we talk a little bit about the Empire Mine Cottage, which of course is another Willis Polk project. And while we're over on this side, in the little hallway, we actually have 2 pictures of the room. So this is what the room looked like during the Bourn era. Dark wood trim, much like the study right across the hall. And thanks to ARG, who is an architecture firm here in San Francisco that's working with us on our master plan, they donated their services to allow us to take some samples of the wall paint all the way down to the base, and they put it on the electron microscope. And we were able to confirm the paint and the stain color of the walls underneath all these layers of paint. So we know, I told them this, I found this picture and it took me a long time to figure out what room it was because it was such a weird little cropped shot. But I said, you know, that stain looks really dark, but it's a black and white picture. And I said, you know, if I was looking at this room and it was me, I would have done it like the gentleman's study across the hall. You know, I think that would have looked really stunning. And so I was really, really excited when 2 weeks ago they confirmed that my hunch from this one very small photo was right. And then this is what the room looked like during the Roth period. And so you see our crystal chandelier, and you see a little bit later pool table that they had in the room. You still see a little game table over there on the side and a trunk. But you can see that they lightened all of the trim, but they kept the wallpaper. So this is a chinois style wallpaper of peonies. It reminds me so much of porcelain art. It's not really a natural pattern per se. It's a little bit stylized. And again, these are the only 2 photos that exist of it. And so we've been inventorying the house from top to bottom for the last 8 years. And in the very last closet, in a little tiny envelope, I found these little strips of paper in an envelope marked trophy. And they were 1-inch pulls of this wallpaper. And it's about a 6-inch by 10-inch piece when you put it all back together like a puzzle. And it confirmed that the walls were peach with fuchsia, like the sofas behind Susan there, and blue flowers. So pink was still a very masculine color in the 1920s. It wasn't until almost the 1930s that it really starts to be associated as a feminine color. And so it makes a lot of sense that, you know, Bourn is having these sofas and his gentleman's lounge and everything. And he chose some really lovely pieces. The crystal chandelier in here, which we actually had restored a few years ago, kind of kicking off this project, is an original Baccarat crystal chandelier. And it has a really unusual blown glass candy cane detail to it. Those are actually solid, full pieces of blown and twisted glass. Even though Matthew Shields, who did all of our beautiful electrical work over the last few years as a part of the restoration project, even though Matthew has worked with these things for his entire career, he was terrified of those candy canes. And one of them had been broken historically. And so he was really upset that one of them was short. And so we actually shortened all of them by a 1/2 inch to make them even again. And he said there was nothing more terrifying than cutting them, because if he shattered one, we were gonna have to like have a new one blown by Baccarat. And it was just absolutely terrifying. But this piece actually wasn't in the room any longer. It was in an upstairs bedroom directly above us, and it was hanging in the room, and it was broken, and it was missing a bunch of pieces. And so we actually restored it and put that back together a few years ago. So here you can see Mr. Bourne's table, and we have it set right now with some sherry and some cigars and some tobacco and some nice clay poker chips. And you always want some nuts, a little snack action happening there. And this is actually his table, and Mrs. Roth gave this to us in 1986 as a part of her bequest. And we ordered these new Chippendale style chairs so that we would have some chairs that people could sit in eventually. We have our lovely 1920s radio and turntable right behind them. And, you know, they had, looking at those pictures and the artwork that he'd pulled, I pulled some of our 18th century Italian Capricio paintings. And these were really popular for people to pick up on the Grand Tour. You can imagine you went all over Europe and you're seeing all these different sites, and you would go into somewhere like Italy where you have all these ancient ruins, and you would see all these ruins and you would want to capture them all, especially in the 18th century, you can imagine. But you couldn't, right? And so they would paint all of them into one picture. And then you would take that picture home and you could recall seeing all these different sites. And so these Capricio paintings became really popular and very collectible later on. And we actually have 3 of them in the collection. So I pulled 2 of them into here, and they're playing substitute a little bit until more of the artwork arrives. And then I pulled out a couple of our Bruce Porters. There's actually 3 Bruce Porters currently on display in the room. And again, Bruce Porter, for those that don't know, he designed our garden. He was a Renaissance man and an artist, and he was a close friend of the Bourns throughout, you know, their adult lives. And we have quite a lot of pieces. We have 65 pieces in the collection from Bruce Porter. And so I pulled out a few masculine pieces, you know, in the hopes that William would have shown one of his friends, you know, current works. And we've pulled out, you know, we have this needlework map of England that shows all of the districts all the way up. And so I thought that was rather fun, and with his world travels. And here's what one of these game tables looks like when it folds in half. And so they're really fun. They accordion in the middle, and there's hinges that are hidden in them. Then they pop open when you need them, and the legs kick out, and then you have a full table. This one is a little bit older, and this one actually has these lobes at the corner so that you had somewhere to put your candlesticks. So that one's really fantastic. And then, you know, again, this is that bronze that I mentioned. This is actually in the room during the Bourn period, and he is a soldier on horseback. And so we've been able to pull him in, and we have Thoreau and Jefferson here. And we have a captain's portrait. And so he's actually a part of the Melville Merton collection, but the captain is going to be replaced by the master's portrait as soon as I can find him. We're hunting him down on the art market as we speak. So we'll have him back in the space. And then we have another Bruce Porter. This is called Afternoon in the Garden with Luxembourg, and it's a mother and son from the Bruce Porter collection, an original little oil that's been here. So you can kind of see from the long view of the room, you're going to see my hideous little table that I talked to you on so that I don't put my drink on an antique. And the table is going to go right there centered underneath the chandelier, and you'll be able to walk all the way around it. And eventually we'll be able to have you sit down there in the corner and play, or you'll be able to take a moment and enjoy one of the chairs here. So that's going to be exciting.
Julie, please don't forget to show us the floor.
Oh, how could I? So here you can really see the bow ties. Let's see, the color is sort of weird when I get at an angle. Can you see them kind of popping there?
Yes. Yeah, and it's amazing having known this floor before it was refinished or restained, what a difference it makes to have that stain and how they pop in the little, as you called them, leopard sort of striped.
Yeah, they sort of look like little tiger stripes.
Tiger stripes, yeah.
And it's looking, if my video is showing, you know, it's looking a little yellow. It's a little bit more of a caramely brown and like shades of caramel into a nice, warm, deep, like chestnut. It's a really beautiful, beautiful, you can see it a little better there in the distance, that tone of the floor, because those are mahogany. Most of the furniture in here is mahogany. And there's actually a fun story about this fireplace mantle, actually. This is one of the few fireplace mantles that I know exactly what date they bought it. I have a picture of it in the showroom, and I have an invoice for this little fireplace. So, you know, there's 17 fireplace surrounds in the house, and every one of them is different. And very few of them were actually, you know, dated to the early 20th century. Most of them, like this one, were antiques that the Bourns bought overseas and had shipped here. And we know this one because it came out of Basil's shop in London, and we have a lot of correspondence, and we actually have a full catalog from Basil, Dighton, and his catalog shows circular kind of check marks and initials, and it had a glossy 8x10 photograph of this mantle, so they really were curious about it. And so we have that along with the letter about buying it. And then I know a lot about what was arriving because there was an accident one day. So I don't want to make everyone seasick as I turn too quickly. There was an accident and some things were damaged in shipment. And in order to file the insurance claim, they had to list the contents of the delivery. And it was a little bit of everything. There was like large Ming vases, oversized crystal and silver candelabrum. There was a fireplace mantle. There's some cabinets. Like, it was a little bit of everything that you would have bought at auction to fill the house. And we know what they were buying and the quantity that they were buying. And there's an absolute, one of my favorite letters from Agnes about the same time. She's shopping in Europe, and she's going to these different auctions with her daughter, who she actually thought was quite good at interior decorating. And it's not a comment that you would be supportive today of a mother making about her daughter. But at the time, she says, should she ever need to work? Clearly hoping that that would never be necessary. She thought she was rather good at it, and she could probably make a go of it as a profession. So Agnes writes this to one of her girlfriends. And so she really helped pick a lot of the furniture throughout the house. And she would go to these pre-sales, into these showrooms, and she would circle things that she thought were interesting. And then she would send those to her parents. And then William would initial when he liked something, and Agnes would do the same thing. And sometimes William crossed things out. He didn't like that piece. So we have a couple of these in the archives, and they're fantastic because you really get to see the process and where they were going and what markets they were going to and what dealers they were dealing with. And some of them were in New York, and some of them were in London, and some were in Paris. And Agnes writes to a friend, as I see dear old Filoli going up brick by brick, I think what a massive place it is. Right. So she was trying to figure out how to fill 56 rooms of furnishings and to make it look like they belonged in this 18th century style Georgian home.
I was going to remind you of that quote and hope that you'd share it with us, because it's true. When you think of poor Agnes having to fill all those rooms, it was so much work for her. But to imagine what it must have been like, you know, when they finally were able to move into the house and have it be fully furnished. It's just a wonderful thought. I have a couple questions for you. So one of our members is asking, since the property is on the San Andreas Fault, which I think is an interesting story in and of itself, right? All these families, all these wealthy families bought homes out in the country to flee San Francisco after the earthquake, and here the Bourns landed right on the fault. But since the house is on the fault, how do you protect things in this room and in other rooms from potential earthquakes?
Well, we
are museum wax.
Oh yeah. We're 400 meters off of the San Andreas Fault. It runs right through the tree line across the field at the western side of the garden. And there's about a 12-foot difference between the two tectonic plates where they meet there at the fault line. So you can see the Asian plate is sort of rolled up on top of the North American plate. And you can actually see the difference in soils. Like they are fundamentally two continents crashing into each other at the soil level even. It's really fascinating. And if you do the estate trail and you do the 1 mile loop, you actually walk right along both sides of the fault. And at Fault Bridge, you get to cross over where it's really obvious, and we have signs, and you can straddle two tectonic plates like the kids do on their field trip. I've done it, it's very fun. And you can really see the divide in the creek. Plates work and slip and what they do. And the USGS actually excavated here on site a few summers back, and they dug these 50-foot long trenches that were 15 feet deep and 4 feet wide, and they let me go in them. It was really exciting. Dr. Carol Prentice and Susan got to go into, we put on our hard hats, and we got to go down into the trench. And right there where they did the excavation is where the creek over time has overflowed so many times that it's washed the fault flat. So instead of that 12-foot difference, you have this nice flat area that straddles the tectonic plate zone. And so they could go down, and you could track 1,500 years of earthquakes on property. And it looks like about every 300 years, this portion of the fault slips just a little. And when it moved last, it moved about 12 feet in the 1906 earthquake. So I feel good after looking at the science, right? That I've got 200 more years. That's what I'm hoping. But we use museum wax on larger objects. We have occasionally, you might see what we call like a seat belt of like 75-pound fishing line that's into an anchor in the wall, so that something's waxed at the bottom, and hopefully even if it were to break the wax a little bit, it would be kind of caught by a seat belt. Sometimes we have our professional mount makers and blacksmiths make mounts that go in and kind of grab and hold an object into place. We put sandbags into things like the Ming vases. They're internally weighted to make them bottom heavy when they're naturally kind of top heavy. So sometimes the lids and things, we do cascading weights down the center of them to like hold them down, and then they have bags in them. So we're kind of constantly looking for creative ways to seismically stabilize the collection, and it's something that is kind of an ongoing struggle. If we were a regular art museum, I could put mounts down and you expect to see them, but when the table is an object in the collection, and he is an object in the collection, and this is an object in the collection, it becomes much trickier because I can't drill a hole into this table. So we have to make clamp mounts, and those are pretty complicated. And then if you want to quickly switch a room around, you have about 6 months of mount making to do on the fly. It's tricky. It's really, really hard in a historic house setting because of everything being an object. It's definitely a struggle.
Well, Julie, let me ask you, our friend Corinne
Yeah.
has a question for us. And I was gonna ask you this too. The largest piece in your collection
Yes.
is our house. And even though it has a brick facade, I think it's really interesting how Mr. Bourn was thoughtful and prescient about how he built it.
Yeah, so at the time of the 1906 earthquake, I know it seems crazy, especially if, like, I was born in California. I'm a peninsula native, and my grandparents' house straddles the fault in Portola Valley. And we thought in 1906 that earthquakes were caused by steam building up in the Earth's core. That is still fundamentally what we believed as a population in 1906. We just didn't have the science on it yet. And so when they came down here, they thought that they were getting away from wherever that steam location may have been. And it was the first month that they moved into the house that an earthquake happened. And the master bedroom ceiling and this room fell down. And it was September 1917, and it was at like 1:30 in the morning. You can look it up in the earthquakes of San Francisco and the region. And it was a little earthquake that was enough to take down a couple of these plaster ceilings. They had no idea that they were 400 feet off of it, but they knew that the area clearly suffered from some sort of earthquake. Their house on Webster Street is on bedrock up there in Pacific Heights. And so they were actually miraculous. They had almost no damage to Webster Street in the 1906 earthquake. But the city wasn't habitable for almost 3 years. You didn't have gas, you didn't have water, the fires, there wasn't facilities. So they didn't move back into the city right away. They lived at Empire Mine for over 5 years. I think it was 6 or 7 years even, that they were back and forth. And so when they came down here, yeah, they thought they were getting away from it, but they knew that this was a possibility. So we're built like a 4-story skyscraper. We are commercial construction, riveted steel up to 30 inches thick. That's why our walls are so thick. Like right now in this room, you're actually in a smaller in-between section between the main body of the house and the walls of the ballroom. So that's why we have the lower ceiling in here. And the walls actually have a smaller dimension. It's about an 8-inch steel in this part of the house, where they're up to 30 inches in the ballroom. They're about 24 inches in the main body of the house. They're 4 inches on the staff wing, where the rooms are smaller. And so it varies depending on where you are. And in the 90s, we had a retrofit, multi-million-dollar seismic upgrade, where they put in 1,500 extra Z-bars to stabilize our interior corners. They did a ton of foundation improvement. The main body of the house is built on pylons that are 4 feet by 4 feet concrete block. And they dug underneath the house, and they dug out and excavated a grid pattern, and they cemented in a giant grid every single pylon that supports the main body of the house. They opened up the roof line in the ballroom and added in some additional steel beams across the width of that space. So they've made us as strong as we can be. In Loma Prieta in '89, we had a number of rooms that received some cracks to the ceilings, but we didn't have, I think Tom Rogers told me we had one teacup that broke. And I know just yesterday, there was a 6-point-something earthquake down in Southern California, and my phone has the little app on it that alerts you to earthquakes, and it said duck, cover, and hold. And I was like, oh, doorway, going to a steel doorway. And then I kind of waited it out and I said, okay, but I felt them like roll through the house before, and we're in pretty good shape. So I'm very grateful for Polk's engineering.
Yes, me too. It is, let's hope, a safe place to be if we have to be there for an earthquake. I have one more question I want to ask you, and then we're running a couple minutes over, and hopefully folks don't mind. But the display case that you have in the room there, is that an original piece? Did that come with the Roths? Could you tell us about that real quickly?
If you look at that picture of the room in the Roth era, they had a case that was very similar to this one. It was a little narrower, and it didn't have a raised foot. It almost went all the way down to the ground. This display case was actually built by one of our facilities team, who is retired in the recent years. But this case was built by Ted Cardoza, and Ted was a beautiful woodworker, and he made this piece. And before he retired, we moved it across the house, and he had made me swear that I wasn't going to make him move it again. So I had to wait till Ted retired to move it into this room. I swore up and down because it's a beast. It has giant mirror interiors and plate glass and big doors, and it's like 9 feet wide. It's giant. And so I had promised that I wouldn't make him move it again. 6 months after he retired, it moved in here. And I love it here. It's great.
And I want to thank Julie, and thank you all for being our members and supporting us. We couldn't do it without you. We appreciate you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.